Venuti defines domestication and foreignization as follows. Domestication is writing in a transparent, fluent, invisible style in order to minimize the foreignness of the TT. In addition, it covers adherence to domestic literary canons by carefully selecting the texts that are likely to lend themselves to such translation strategies. Foreignization entails choosing a foreign text and developing a translation method along the lines which are excluded by dominant cultural values in the target language. Its effect is to make the reader aware of the foreign origin of the text, using calques and trying to maintain the source text structures and syntax. Lawrence Venuti was the first one to formulate the two strategies in a modern sense. In The Translator's Invisibility, A History of Translation, Venuti explains these strategies while discussing what he defines as translator invisibility. That is, the translator's situation and activity in contemporary Anglo-American culture. What he describes is a situation where the translator writes a target text in English that is fluent, easily readable by English readers as an original text, without peculiarities of the source text language. In this context, fluency is a danger to the extent that it tends to render translations so similar to original texts that it is impossible to tell them apart. The effect created is called by Venuti's illusion of transparency. Therefore, the strategy adopted to achieve invisibility in a translation is domestication. Venuti is very critical of domestication, preferring to use foreignization as much as possible. He sees foreignization as the only way to escape from the hegemonic Anglo-American ethnocentric tendency to impose their cultural values. Moreover, the aim of foreignizing translation is to catch off guard the reader and his linguistic and genre expectation of the target language to highlight the otherness of the target text. The product of this process is called resistant translation. Although Venuti is the first to use the terms domestication and foreignization, the concepts behind them were known. Friedrich Schleiermacher was a German theologian and translator, recognized as the founder of modern hermeneutics, which is an approach to interpretation heavily influenced by the literary movement called Romanticism, at the core of which individuals' feelings have much more importance than absolute truth. In 1813 he wrote Über die verschiedenen Methoden des Übersetzen, on the different methods of translating, a treatise on translation that is still influential nowadays. He states that translation happens every time there is a communication, therefore not only in special occasions, for example a business transaction, but also in everyday life, for example between people who come from different parts of the same country and speak a different dialect or belong to a different social class. Concerning translation of a foreign tongue into the translator's mother tongue, he distinguishes between two types of translators: Dolmetscher, interpreter, and Übersetzer, the translator. The Dolmetscher is the translator who works on commercial texts, while the Übersetzer is the one that does a translation proper, that works on what Schleiermacher thinks is a high creative level, such as scholarly and artistic text. He explains that business transactions happen mostly in oral form, and even written it is quite a mechanical process with no creativity involved. This is the reason behind the decision to call it interpreter. On the other hand, science and arts are better suited to the written word, in his opinion. Therefore, a translator will deal mostly with written texts. Schleiermacher states that non-literary texts are more likely to have direct correspondences compared to literary texts, where the author is freer to use their creativity. Schleiermacher focuses on the translator and the two aims that a translation can have: moving the reader towards the writer, or moving the writer towards the reader. The first strategy is also called alienation, from which Benuti derives his foreignization. The second is naturalization, called by Benuti domestication. As the names themselves suggest, the former aims to be faithful to the source text, leaving in the reader a sense of alienation. The latter prefers to adapt the foreign content to the reader's expectations, making the text more familiar and natural. Schleiermacher considers the alienation the only true translation, the one that makes the readers come into contact with the genius of the language that was native to the writer. Schleiermacher defines a perfect translation as a text that sounds like it was written by the author themselves if they were bilingual. Benuti is aware of the contradictions of using foreignization, mainly because it is a subjective term and the fact that it is impossible to completely exclude domestication from a translation since it depends on the dominant target culture values to be accepted. However, he remarks it is possible to completely exclude domestication from a translation since it depends on the dominant target culture values to be accepted. However, he remarks the ethical obligation that a translator has towards the source text and the source culture, and he is concerned with the ethical effect that a translator has towards the source text and the source culture, and he is concerned with the ethical effect that a translation has inside the target culture and how it affects the internal power struggle. Benuti agrees that there must be a concern with the ethical effect that a translation has inside the target culture and how it affects the internal power struggle. Benuti agrees that there must be a balance between domestication and foreignization, that these two are polar opposites, and that the translator must find a way in between during the Benuti agrees that there must be a balance between domestication and foreignization, that these two are polar opposites, and that the translator must find a way in between during the translation. The translator is forced to translate the text in such a way that it is domesticated enough to be accepted into the discourse, and a way in between during the translation. The translator is forced to translate the text in such a way that it is domesticated enough to be accepted into the discourse, and yet alien and foreignizing enough to be resistant. Benuti leaves the term foreignization and the way to achieve accepted into the discourse, and yet alien and foreignizing. In his works, Benuti assesses translations following his two-part system according to his stated goals of achieving resistant translations. Benuti says that a common practice to evaluate a text is among other cultures, both English and foreign language, making comparisons and highlighting the differences. A translated text, whether prose or poetry, fiction or non-fiction, is judged acceptable by most publishers, reviewers, and readers when it reads fluently, when the absence of any linguistic or stylistic peculiarities makes it seem transparent, giving the appearance that it reflects the foreign writer's personality or intention or the essential meaning of the foreign text. Foreignization and domestication are two translation strategies that are ambiguously and blurrily defined by Benuti. There are no clear steps to follow. The effect is unpredictable, and to what extent to use them is left to the translator. Since there is still a great debate around them, especially around foreignization, I think that they are not very helpful in evaluating a translation in general. However, They can be of assistance in assessing the faithfulness to the source text and the scope of the translation. Analyzing how many times the translator made use of domestication and foreignization, one can have more information on their priorities.